We will come back to that in a kind of a summary, but I like to show you something that you said recently about Somaliland. Let me see, I can put that up. You had this to say about Somaliland. Somaliland deserves a United Nations sponsored independence referendum, same as Eritrea had in 1993. International recognition of its success as a functioning state and nation long overdue. Let the people decide. Ambassador Nad, sir, Somaliland is, I believe, the most peaceful and secure when you compare it to Somalia. Somaliland has gained independence, has obtained its own independence for over 30 years, with about 4 or 5 times free presidential elections. I was there a few months ago and I saw the economy, I saw what goes on in the political system, and I can say that politically and economically, they are even more stable than Somalia. The people of Somaliland has demonstrated so that they can govern themselves. Why do they need a referendum?
Well, I wish you could make the argument you just made in front of the African Union. Whether it's a referendum or not a referendum, they need a process that is recognized by the international community to move them from the category of a de facto country to a de jure country. And I'm sure you understand the difference, and I think most of the viewers do as well. Because right now, as you said, Somaliland is a functioning state. As a matter of fact, I am not a international attorney, but if we look at history, we can say that Somaliland existed as a de facto legal country for, I believe at least 1 week before Somalia itself became a country, and
right.
The two joined together. So what I'm getting at is it is way past time to have some kind of an international process that could put that international stamp of approval on Somaliland to say that, okay, now you are a de jure state. You're welcome to join the Africa Union. You're welcome to join the United Nations, because that is what has been missing. And I know that it has been tremendously frustrating to all the Somalilanders. I'll tell you a very brief story. When I was ambassador in Ethiopia back in, I think this was around 2000, I had the privilege to know the first president of Somaliland, President Igal. And I met with him several times, and he was so frustrated because he could not get the United States to give him any kind of attention. And I had the misfortune to tell him, I said, Mr. President, here's the problem. Somaliland does not have any problems. It does not have any terrorists. It does not destabilize its neighbors. It doesn't have a security problem. And he looked at me and he said, you mean if we had terrorists in Somaliland, then the United States would work with us? And I said, exactly. So, I could understand his deep frustration. And that has basically been the history of Somaliland. I can't call them the little country that can. They're very much a can-do country. They do not cause anybody any serious problems. They're taking care of their own affairs. They are thriving without any international development assistance. Recently, they received, I know, a major infusion of investments from the port of Dubai. So they're doing it. They are running their country more successfully than, I don't want to put a percentage, but a large percentage of other countries in the world. Let's not just say Africa. And there's this frustration that they cannot get international recognition, because I know there is a whole line of countries that would be willing to be the second country to recognize them. The problem is getting that number one. And I know that recently they established relations with Taiwan, and I know that there are practical reasons for doing that. But because of the one China policy, Taiwan also has very limited international recognition as an independent country. So, there we are.
Yeah, Ambassador, you are correct, and I think the sentiments that by now Somaliland should be recognized is quite huge out there, and you recall that Somaliland is the only country in the region that has no China relations in the area, and shouldn't you think that the USA should take advantage of that and do something? And the other question would be, what stops the US from saying to the rest of the world, Somaliland has demonstrated it can rule herself, let's recognize her and recognize her? Because if the US does that, the rest of the world will follow, isn't it?
Yeah, as I said, I think there are a number of countries that are willing to be number two, but here's the problem. Remember, I'm not speaking for the U.S. government, okay? So I'm just going to talk about practicalities here. You and I both know that the African Union is viscerally opposed to Somaliland independence because of a whole range of reasons, but the fundamental reason is they are scared to death that would then encourage secessionist movements in other countries that are member states of the African Union. So that is a tremendous challenge to overcome, is to get the African Union to accept Somaliland. And that's why I was mentioning a referendum, because remember, the African Union embraced Eritrea's independence after the referendum. So that's one. American government, and again, I'm not speaking for the government, I'm supposing the American government does not want hostile relations with the African Union, because in effect, the African Union represents 51 independent countries in Africa. So that is one of the biggest problems to overcome. On the other hand, you mentioned a very practical reason why it would make a certain amount of sense for the American government to recognize Somaliland. And I am optimistic that in the next couple of years that there will be some positive movement in that direction.
Now, talking about the African Union, Mr. Ambassador, you served in Africa for so many years. I think your political career was essentially spent in Africa, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ethiopia. You can name the rest. And
Zambia, Cameroon, Togo, Seychelles, Zimbabwe, right. Let's go.
Right. And you know that when it comes to these conflicts and crises in Africa, the African Union has largely remained dormant, doing almost nothing. For example, in Cameroon, where this conflict has been going on for 5 years and counting now, the African Union hasn't as much as called for a kind of hearing to see how a solution can be provided. Instead, it is Europe, it is the USA talking about how a solution could come in. Where is the place of the African Union in this conflict? Why does it have to be Europe or the USA? And why is the Americans and the Europeans not holding Africa accountable for the problems in the continent?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question, because at the end of the day, it should be the African Union that should be looking at these problems. I cannot betray some of my private conversations when I was Assistant Secretary of State, but I think I also said on my Twitter account that among my greatest regrets of not being able to help resolve an issue was the one in Cameroon, exactly because of that. And all I can say is I did my best to interest as much of the international community as possible to take a much, much more proactive approach in Cameroon. As to why the African Union itself doesn't get engaged in that, I think that question has to go to the officials of the African Union. Part of the answer is all you have to do is look at the membership of the Africa Union and see, who some of the longest serving heads of state are, how long they have been in their positions as heads of state. And of course, they have a certain amount of influence. So, I remember, and I'm sure you remember the old Organization of Africa
corruption within the African setting, Mr. Ambassador?
No, I'm not saying corruption within the Africa Union.
So
what I'm saying is that, like the United Nations, the Africa Union has to respond to all of its members. And if you look at some of those members, I would posit that some of those members are not leaders in democracy.
That's a little interesting. But then, when you talk about leaders in democracy,